The first transmission came on a Thursday. Rain slicked the windows of the North Dakota listening post when the signal hit the deep space array. At first, analysts thought it was a glitch too clean, too deliberate to be natural. Then came the pattern. It wasn't just a signal. It was a message. By Friday evening, the United Nations had called an emergency summit. By Saturday morning, a ship the size of Manhattan dropped into low orbit above Earth's equator, cloaked in silver and bristling with antennae like the whiskers of some impossible animal. Rodrick Calder stood in the hangar of Fort Carson, boots laced tight, jaw tight even tighter. The others around him, scientists, linguists, military brass, shared the same breathless tension. Rodrick wasn't the smartest man in the room, nor the highest ranking. But he was there because he'd survived more than most. Afghanistan, the Andes crash, the Sumatran tsunami. He didn't break easy. He was there because someone figured if things went sideways, they'd need someone who'd already stared into the worst of it and come out the other side. The alien who stepped off the ship didn't look like what anyone expected. No tentacles, no shimmering eyes or gelatinous skin. Just a tall, willowy being with skin like polished obsidian and a head shaped like a crescent moon. Its name was Kale. It spoke through a translator implanted in its chest, voice flat and clinical. Your planet is compromised. You will be relocated. Rodrick blinked. Relocated? You mean evacuated? Kale turned toward him. Your species lacks the resilience to survive the coming solar destabilization. Your biosphere will collapse. We are offering preservation. General Haskins stepped forward. We're not interested in surrendering Earth. Kale tilted its head. Not surrender. Extraction. You will not survive here. Rodrick folded his arms. You think we're weak? Kale didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. That single word fell like a hammer. The room went dead still. Rodrick didn't argue. He just said, let me show you something. Over the next week, Kale was escorted under heavy watch through the scars of Earth's survival. Rodrick took him across continents. They began in Chernobyl. Rodrick stood on the cracked concrete of the ghost city, Geiger counter ticking steadily. This place should have killed anyone who stayed. And yet some did. Old women. Farmers. They grew food in poisoned soil, drank from radioactive wells, and lived longer than expected. Why? Because they were too stubborn to leave. Kale observed the empty buildings, the trees growing through walls. Survival through ignorance. Not resilience. Rodrick didn't flinch. Maybe. But they're still alive. Next, they flew to the Mojave. He showed Kale the desert towns running on solar panels and stubbornness. Then the hurricane-ravaged coastlines where people rebuilt again and again, despite the storms. They went to war zones, refugee camps, and high-rise cities choking with smog. Everywhere, people lived. Not just barely, but with music, laughter, and spiteful joy. Kale watched, recorded, studied. But it wasn't until the accident in the Rockies that the alien began to understand. Rodrick had taken Kale hiking. The alien had requested to observe human endurance firsthand. It was supposed to be controlled, monitored, safe. A demonstration. But the ridge gave way. Rodrick saw the rock crumble too late. He shoved Kale back, barely missed the worst of it. But his leg was crushed beneath a fallen boulder. The pain came like fire. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Blood soaked into the dirt. Kale hovered over him, scanning with a device from his belt. Femur fracture. Multiple lacerations. You require immediate transport. Rodrick gritted his teeth. Get help. Don't carry me. You don't know the terrain. Kale hesitated. You will go into shock. I've been in shock before. Kale left faster than any human could have moved. But the minutes dragged like anchors. Rodrick fought to stay conscious. He tore his shirt, made a crude tourniquet, packed snow against the worst of the bleeding. The cold gnawed at him, but he forced himself to count seconds, keep his brain working. He passed out once. Came to with a start. When the rescue team arrived, Kale returned with them, unusually silent. At the hospital, Rodrick underwent surgery. The doctors inserted a titanium rod into his leg. He spent 2 weeks in recovery, 3 more in physical therapy. The pain was constant, but he never asked for more than standard meds. He grunted through the worst of it, muttered curses, and once broke a crutch in frustration. Kale visited him in the rehab ward. You should have died, Kale said. Your species lacks internal resilience. No reinforced bones. No regenerative tissue. And yet, you live through things you shouldn't. Rodrick didn't look up from the resistance band he was pulling. We survive because we don't know how to quit. Kale was quiet for a while. I believed your species was weak. I now believe you are. Statistically improbable. Rodrick snorted. We get that a lot. Then the meteor came. The object was detected 2 weeks after Rodrick returned home. A kilometer across, traveling at a speed that made interception near impossible. Calculations gave Earth 14 days. Panic spread like wildfire. Nations scrambled defense systems. The alien coalition offered evacuation again. Cale stood before the UN, flanked by his delegation. We urge you to accept relocation. The impact will trigger a planetary extinction event. Rodrick was there, legs still stiff, leaning on a cane. He stepped forward. We're not running. President Mendez turned toward him. Rodrick, we need solutions, not speeches. Rodrick nodded. Then let's build one. In the next 72 hours, every mind on Earth bent toward one problem: how to stop the rock. The world's best engineers, physicists, and tacticians pooled resources. Space agencies launched interceptors. Nuclear warheads were retrofitted for atmospheric breach. Mining companies offered drilling tech. Civilians volunteered in droves. Rodrick helped coordinate logistics. He barely slept. Cale watched as humans rallied like ants under floodlight, chaotic but purposeful. You won't make it in time, Cale said. Rodrick wiped sweat from his brow. Maybe, but we'll try. The first attempt failed. The warhead missed its mark. The second detonated prematurely. Morale dipped, but no one stopped. Rodrick pushed through meetings, limped through command rooms, barked through radios. He collapsed once from exhaustion. Cale found him sitting on the floor, breathing hard. You degrade yourself, Cale said. Rodrick laughed hoarsely. Yeah, welcome to Earth. On day 12, the final warhead launched. Struck just right. The meteor split, fragments burning up in the atmosphere. One chunk still hit the Pacific. The wave it triggered hit the California coast hard. Thousands were displaced. Hundreds died. But the planet was still spinning. As the dust settled and relief rolled across the globe, Cale stood on a rooftop beside Rodrick watching the sunrise over Denver. You were right, Cale said. You are not weak. You are infuriatingly persistent. Rodrick leaned on his cane. We're not the fastest, not the strongest, but we survive. That's what we do. Cale turned to him. I misjudged your species. I owe you a correction of record. Rodrick nodded. Start with this: next time you find a planet full of stubborn primates, don't assume we are fragile just because we bleed easy. Cale gave a short nod. Understood. And for the first time, Earth was invited not as refugees, but as fellow survivors. 3 months after the meteor split apart over the Pacific, Rodrick found himself in a modular conference dome on the lunar surface, sitting across from a Zentari biocommunications analyst who kept blinking with 4 eyelids per eye, each set closing at a different interval. It was extremely distracting. I'm not here to rehash the planetary resilience profile, Rodrick said, fingers drumming on the table. You've got terabytes of documentation. I'm here because you asked for something specific. The analyst, whose name translated loosely to Prism of Dissonant Echoes, clicked several mandibles in a pattern Rodrick had learned signified mild confusion or possibly indigestion. Yes, we have reviewed your species crisis logs. Your response patterns demonstrate an anomaly. Let me guess, Rodrick said. We don't follow protocol, we improvise recklessly, and every statistical model goes out the window. No, Prism said. You do follow protocol. Then you abandon it, contradict it, and rebuild it mid-execution. Repeatedly. This behavior is not sustainable. Rodrick leaned forward. Yet here we are. A Zentari assistant wheeled in a stack of translucent data slates, each one flickering with color-coded chaos. Prism selected one at random and projected an overhead image of a flooded city, the buildings half submerged. During the coastal event, your logistics chains rerouted in under 5 hours. Using civilian vehicles. Without central coordination. Correct. Your people risked hypothermia, structural collapse, and infection to deliver insulin to a child trapped on a rooftop. All without direct orders. Rodrick frowned. You pulled that from a drone cam? Several. The data was inconsistent. We assumed a coordinated effort, but it appears to have been spontaneous. Yeah, Rodrick said, that's how we do things. One person does something stupid and brave, and everyone else jumps in. Prism blinked all 8 eyelids again. This is not a stable model. Rodrick stood. It's not a model. It's instinct. The analyst didn't respond, but its antennae twitched like static along a signal line. Later that cycle, Rodrick returned to the orbital transit ring above Mars, where a human medical outpost had been set up to assist with the aftermath of several recent evacuations from a destabilized moon in the Ashari system. Most evacuees suffered from atmospheric trauma, lungs adapted to methane-heavy air reacting poorly to even trace amounts of oxygen. The station's human medical lead, Dr. Talia Vance, was elbow-deep in triage when Rodrick arrived. "You're early," she said, not looking up from the diagnostic table. "I thought you were still arguing with the talking chandelier." "I was," Rodrick said. "They're still shocked we don't operate like one big hive mind." "Must be exhausting for them," she said, adjusting the biopump attached to a swaying Ashari adolescent. "This one's hemolymph is separating at the protein level. I'm trying to stabilize it with a synthetic binder, but it's reacting like I insulted its grandmother." Rodrick watched as she leaned in, hands steady, eyes scanning the readout. The alien's skin was translucent and rippling with iridescent pulses, which slowed slightly as the binder took hold. "How long can it last like that?" Rodrick asked. "Maybe 12 hours with the assist. Without it, 15 minutes. She moved to the next bed, where an adult Ashari was convulsing. A junior nurse, clearly rattled, was trying to secure a pressure cuff to a limb that kept retracting. "Stop fighting the anatomy," Talia said, gently pushing the nurse aside. "Watch. You brace here, align the cuff with the neural groove, and let it contract on its own." The nurse nodded, visibly embarrassed. Rodrick stepped aside as another gurney rolled in. This one carried a human. "What happened?" he asked. "Collapsed in the supply corridor," Talia said. "Dehydration, mild hypoxia, probably hasn't eaten in 2 days." Rodrick crouched beside the stretcher. The tech was in her 20s, sunken cheeks and cracked lips betraying the obvious. She looked up at him with glassy eyes. "Didn't want to slow down," she murmured. Rodrick didn't say anything. He just squeezed her shoulder. 3 hours later, after the critical cases had stabilized, Rodrick joined Talia in the decontamination chamber. "You ever get tired of scrapping together miracles out of broken parts?" he asked. She peeled off her gloves. "Every day. But if I stop, someone dies." He nodded slowly. "They send me here because they want to understand why we don't fall apart when everything else does." Talia chuckled under her breath. "Tell them we're too busy to fall apart." Rodrick looked through the observation window at the ward beyond. The Ashari adolescent was curled in a nest of thermal blankets, colors shifting gently with each breath. The human tech was asleep for drip feeding into her arm. Later that week, Rodrick was summoned to a diplomatic session aboard the Teltari flagship, a vessel shaped like a spiral helix spinning through subspace. He arrived with stiff joints and a datapad full of unanswered messages. The Teltari ambassador, a being composed of jointed light and mirrored plates, greeted him with a flicker of blue projections. "We wish to understand the mechanism by which your species performs under duress," it said. Rodrick sighed. "You'll need to be more specific. Your species lacks uniformity, central command, and redundant systems. Yet you achieve positive outcomes disproportionate to your resources." Rodrick tilted his head. "You make it sound like a software glitch. We do not understand how you maintain cohesion without conformity." Rodrick scratched the back of his neck. "We don't. We argue constantly. We contradict each other. But when something threatens us, we put everything else aside." The Teltari ambassador paused, its light flickering erratically. "This behavior is inconsistent with your internal conflicts and resource allocation inefficiencies." Rodrick chuckled. "You ever seen a family fight over dinner, then unite against a burglar without blinking? That's us. We're a mess, but we're a mess." The ambassador considered that. "This may explain why your species is disproportionately represented among crisis responders throughout the sector." Rodrick narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Since the meteor event, humans have been requested for over 90% of interspecies disaster relief operations. Many of your people are currently embedded in unstable regions, often without full authorization." Rodrick exhaled. "Yeah, that sounds like us. Your people do not await invitation. They arrive." Rodrick rubbed his temples. I'll pass that compliment along. 2 days later, Rodrick received an encrypted message from a mining colony on the edge of the Nusari expanse. A methane breach had triggered a chain reaction, collapsing several extraction tunnels. Rescue teams couldn't reach the trapped workers without specialized gear, and the local authorities had declared the situation unrecoverable. The message was from a human technician embedded on the colony. She'd gone in anyway. Rodrick stared at the screen for a moment, then stood. "Where are you going?" asked the aide assigned to him. "Out there," Rodrick said. Someone forgot to tell her it was impossible. By the time Rodrick arrived at the colony, the technician had already pulled out 6 survivors using a jury-rigged exosuit and a tether line made from mining cable and pressure seal tape. Her oxygen was less than 20%. She'd collapsed from carbon buildup. Rodrick dragged her into the evac pod himself. "You could have died," he said. She managed a weak grin. "But I didn't." Later, as the transport cruised through the void, Rodrick turned to the onboard observer from the Galactic Coalition. "Still think we're unpredictable?" The observer, a pale amphibious being with translucent skin, nodded slowly. "Yes," it said. "But now we fear what may happen when others start to imitate you." Rodrick stood ankle-deep in ash and gravel beneath the sulfur clouds of Ilion Beta, shielding his mouth with a soaked scarf. The colony's outer perimeter was gone melted into slag by a thermal vent rupture that had turned the southern ridge into a river of glass. What was left of the central dome stood like a cracked egg, its struts hissing under stress, vents coughing steam every few seconds. He hadn't even reached the main chamber and already his boots were baking from the inside. Behind him, Lieutenant Juno Park kicked at a twisted support beam, her suit's cooling gel whining under overload. "Radiation's rising by the minute," she said. "We've got 4 hours, maybe 5. After that, this place turns into a microwave." Rodrick checked the readout on his wrist unit. "We won't need that long." She gave him a look. "You're assuming they're alive. If they weren't, the emergency beacon wouldn't be transmitting manual pings. Could be a glitch. Could be a survivor using their last breath to hit a button." Juno exhaled sharply and tapped her helmet. "All right, let on, Lazarus." They moved fast, dodging collapsed walkways and skirting geysers of scalding gas. Inside the dome's airlock, the door had to be cut open with a plasma saw, and the inner chamber was worse. The temperature had cooked everything: soft wiring, insulation, even food packs into a tar-like sludge. They found the first body near the comm station, curled up under a heat shield with a crushed oxygen tank beside it. No ID, no sign of trauma, just heat stroke and bad luck. 2 corridors down, they heard the knock. 3 short raps. Pause. Then 2 long ones. Juno froze. That's pattern code. Someone's in there. They pried open a maintenance hatch and crawled through a shaft thick with chemical soot. At the end was a small storage bay, half collapsed, lit only by the flicker of a cracked emergency panel. Inside were 5 survivors, 2 adults, 3 teens huddled over a makeshift coolant rig fashioned from recycled coolant coils and a stripped-down refrigeration unit. The air smelled of charred plastic and unwashed skin. One of the adults, a man in a torn jumpsuit, was holding a child's head in his lap. The boy's lips were blue. "He needs saline," the man rasped. "We ran out yesterday." Juno was already pulling supplies from her pack. Rodrick knelt beside her, checking the boy's pulse. Faint, but present. They ran a line, stabilized the flow, and used the remaining coolant to bring his temperature down. The others were dehydrated, blistered, and suffering from early-stage hyperthermia. But they were alive. "Why didn't you evacuate?" Rodrick asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked around at the others. Then he said, "We were sealing the methane tanks. If those went, the whole ridge would have detonated. We stayed." Rodrick nodded once, then stood. "Evac's on the way. We'll get you out." It took another 2 hours to extract them. Juno had to carry one of the teens who'd passed out from heat exhaustion. Rodrick nearly collapsed hauling the boy and the coolant rig. By the time the evac shuttle docked, both of them were drenched in sweat and running on the last dregs of adrenaline. As the hatch sealed and the med team took over, the man who'd spoken earlier gripped Rodrick's wrist. "You came," he said. Rodrick just nodded and sat down hard on the floor, too tired to speak. 3 days later, Rodrick was back on the orbital platform above Ilion Beta, standing in an observation gallery with a delegation of Vartal scholars, limbless, spherical beings suspended in magneto-grav harnesses. Their skin shimmered with bioluminescent glyphs that shifted based on emotional state. Right now, they flickered with confusion and a touch of concern. You risked 6 personnel to retrieve 5 colonists, the lead scholar said, its glyphs pulsing in tight, repetitive patterns. Statistically inadvisable. Rodrick sipped the hot broth the med techs had insisted he drink. We don't run numbers when someone's still knocking. You endangered the team. They volunteered. One operative required renal filtration therapy. That is not sustainable behavior. Rodrick leaned against the rail, watching the recovering colonists through the glass. We're not trying to be sustainable. We're trying to be human. Sometimes that means doing things that don't make sense on paper. The scholar hovered in silence for several seconds, then rotated slowly. You confuse resilience with recklessness. Rodrick turned. No. We just know the difference between surviving and living. That night, he met with Dr. Talia Vance again, this time in a debrief chamber converted into a makeshift lounge. She was running data analysis on transplant rejection rates among Eshari patients who'd received emergency organ replacements from human-compatible donors. The numbers weren't good. 3rd batch failed, she said, not looking up. We're down to 1 donor type that's even marginally viable. Rodrick poured himself a glass of recycled water. You think it's a compatibility issue? No. I think it's psychological. Their immune systems respond to human tissue the same way they respond to trauma. It's not rejection, it's memory. He sat across from her. You're saying they're remembering the donor's biology as an attack? Exactly. They're too aware of what's been lost. Rodrick looked over the data. So what's the answer? Sedation? No, she said. Integration. We need to teach their biology not to fight the help. How? She finally looked up. We expose them to small doses. Fragments. Let their bodies learn to coexist instead of conquer. He nodded slowly. Like how we learn not to flinch after a burn. Exactly. 1 week later, Rodrick helped oversee the pilot program. The Eshari patients were introduced to human proteins incrementally, their bodies monitored in real time. At first, reactions were severe fever spikes, muscular contractions, even hallucinations. But by the 3rd cycle, something changed. The immune response slowed. The rejection rates dropped. 1 patient, a former atmospheric engineer, stood on her own for the first time in weeks. Rodrick handed her a glass of water. Her 3-fingered hand trembled as she took it. You're healing, he said. She blinked slowly, colors shifting across her skin. Because I stopped fighting the foreign, she said. I welcomed it. Rodrick smiled tiredly. That's how we've survived this long. 2 days later, he stood before the Coalition Assembly on Arkan's Reach, a hall carved into the bones of an ancient asteroid, air-laced with ozone and violet pollen. Delegates from over 70 species sat in concentric chambers, watching him through lenses, sensors, and a dozen other forms of perception. A Marnid delegate tilted its head. Explain again the purpose of your intervention on Ilion Beta. Rodrick didn't hesitate. There were people in danger. That's it. Another delegate, crystalline and humming at a high frequency, said, You committed resources disproportionate to the potential yield. Rodrick met its gaze. We weren't after yield. We were answering a call. The chamber buzzed with overlapping reactions. Some dismissive, others intrigued. A slender being with fractal wings leaned forward. And when the cost outweighs the reward? Rodrick shrugged. Then we pay it. Silence followed. Not the kind of silence that demanded explanation, but the kind that admitted there was nothing left to say. After the session, as Rodrick prepared to leave the asteroid, Kale met him near the docking ring. The obsidian-skinned envoy looked unchanged, but something in his posture had softened. You've altered the volunteer protocols, Kale said. Humans are now listed as high-risk, high-reward entities. Sounds about right. You have become an anomaly in our models. Rodrick raised an eyebrow. Again. This time we will not attempt to correct it. We will adapt to it. Rodrick nodded. That's all we've ever done. The transport engines ignited behind him, casting long shadows across the corridor. Kale extended a hand, not the formal gesture of his people, but a human handshake. Rodrick took it without hesitation. As the ship lifted off, leaving Arkin's Reach spinning slowly behind them, Rodrick leaned back in his seat and let the silence settle. No alarms. No crises. Just the hum of transit and the knowledge that for once nothing more needed to be done.